Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Birthday Salon. Today, I have Junian with me again, and we will be responding to some of the questions from YKid's 2016 birthday book contribution, The Rise of Singapore Civil Society. Once again, we hope our conversations would also inspire you to have similar ones in the classroom and amongst your friends. So, according to YKid, in your opinion, why was it especially apt that it was the first time quite a number of poets had stepped into a mosque during the book launch in September 2015? Yeah.
I think for Wycliffe, the aptness of the moment comes from the fact that he is drawing together people from completely different strands of civil society. So kind of interfaith activists coming together with people who do poetry. On the one hand, these are spheres that do have a lot in common, right? The tight connection between scripture and literary work. On the other hand, though, these are spheres that have evolved quite differently. And I think, at least with contemporary poetry, there's a very secular scene. And so the coming together of that, I think, was what made the act.
I really like what you mentioned as well, and I think there's also a very strong sense of the natural or nature as a metaphor in all of these various strands of civil society. And yeah, I think Wykid brought together different intersections of society through this particular interesting endeavor that he did with his friend. Yeah. And how is physically stepping to a place of worship helpful, you think, for civil society in Singapore?
I think the physical stepping into a place is really what makes something real and human.
Yeah.
Because I think we often talk about religion as an abstract concept, or religious harmony as an abstract concept. But I think can compare to kind of experiencing it firsthand. And part of that is meeting people. But I think there's also something about place and its ability to kind of inspire wonder and awe and to give a real sense of what our community is about. So even for me, I mean, one of the things I like to do is just to try to explore more places of worship in Singapore.
And Singapore is like the best place for something like this, right? We actually have streets with multiple religious institutions, places of worship side by side to each other. Purely because of our geographical constraints, urban planning had to be as such. And very much like what you mentioned, I think there's something very tangible about visiting such a place of worship yourself. One can only read so much about various religions, but that kind of knowledge, that kind of head knowledge is so different from hearing the call to prayer, being in the physical presence, like what you mentioned, and interacting with people from different races and religion. Yeah.
I mean, in theoretical terms, we talk about kind of place-based education, right? Or creating a sense of place. And I think place is just so central to how we understand the world. And sometimes just taking a walk or being in an unfamiliar environment is the best way to know something or find out about something.
Agree. Yeah. Oftentimes it is when we are pushed beyond our comfort zones that learning takes place. I think it was Ray Kroc, founder of McDonald's, that once said that when you're green, you grow, when you ripen, you rot. So Wykid argues that 5 civil society groups even went to Geneva to address representations of UN member states on human rights in Singapore. How is this notable increase in representation reflective of a blossoming civil society in Singapore?
I think the argument that Wykid is making is that the fact that they went all the way to Geneva, right, takes a certain amount of resources and planning and logistical work on top of kind of the research and advocacy involved in compelling their submissions to the UN, right? And so to that extent, that growth in organizational capacity kind of reflects the rise of civil society. I think there's another way in which the word even suggests that there's a certain amount of validation that comes with kind of addressing an institution like the UN that kind of affirms the state of civil society.
Do you reckon that his choice of even is an appropriate one?
I mean, I don't necessarily think it's inappropriate, but I do think we need to bear in mind that there are limitations to internationally oriented efforts, and that it's very easy to fall into a trap where we, kind of uncritically view the global, the international as necessarily superior. And I think that's very true in Singapore. And I think the word even might unintentionally kind of give rise or lend itself to that kind of bias, right? So, for instance, I think there's no reason why a civil society group that spends its time educating young people in Singapore about a particular issue is necessarily less legit less prestigious than one that goes to the UN.
I think it's very interesting what you mentioned as well, that there's that underlying bias or underlying recognition that something that is international or global is necessarily more superior than local efforts of
Yes.
sorts.
And of course, when we talk about international global, sometimes it's often just a code word for Western, right? Or Euro-American. Um, and so perhaps civil society is also about developing kind of localized or indigenous ways of thinking about issues.
Waike concludes his article optimistically, hopeful and confident that civil society in Singapore will continue to blossom. It has been 3 years since his article was published in the birthday book. What examples between 2016 and 2019 can you think of that support his optimism about civil society in Singapore? How much have the past 3 years borne out this optimism?
So I think that's a really interesting question. So I was away from Singapore for a couple of years.
Okay.
And I came back in the summer of 2018, right? So I think the most significant evidence that I've seen that civil society continues to blossom is it's not so much of kind of new organizations or new campaigns or new initiatives, although all that is true and all that reflects kind of a rising kind of space for social and political action. But I think what's been really inspiring is to see kind of young people being more willing to speak up, to call things out, and to put things right. I think there's a far stronger sense amongst even secondary school or JC students that they can be socially involved and socially conscious. So I'm thinking, for instance, about the recent kind of fiasco with NUS and its handling of the Nicholas Lim voyeurism case, where you had a survivor of sexual assault use social media to kind of put pressure on a very established institution, right, to make changes to its practices. And I think that kind of debate and that kind of willingness to kind of challenge what's orthodox really speaks to kind of a wider shift. And in the end, it's this kind of round up shift that I think makes me optimistic about civil society.
Right. And the example that you raised also suggests a very strong connection between technology, social media, along with this gaining momentum of civil society, right? That it almost comes in tandem of sorts, that civil society utilizes this platform as a means to expand their voice and expand their reach.
I think that's totally true. And I think it's a lot more nuanced than what most people think, right? Because even in 2016, there was technology. But I think what's really changed is how people interact with it. And I'm thinking really about the shift from kind of desktop to mobile. I think that just made technology a lot more prevalent in our lives, a lot more intimate. And therefore, kind of blends the personal and the political. And then also, how it's become a lot more social. And that has just made organizing people and organizing civil society a lot easier. How about you? Are you hopeful and confident
about technology?
About civil society?
I think very much so. I grew up in a time where I remember my teachers sharing with us that we were very socially apathetic people. We really didn't really care about the wider society, especially Singapore. And so I think Waikit's article, along with the examples that you raised, and along with recent developments in Singapore, seem to suggest otherwise. Seem to suggest that more people are speaking up a bit more, like what you mentioned, and I just think that maybe it's a paradigm shift that we are observing, that perhaps in a few years it may gain even more momentum. Yeah.
Yes. And I think for people to come to see of themselves as active citizens and find a domain that's not work, not just about family, but about kind of their roles as
right.
Singaporeans.
So thank you so much once again for your time today, Junyan.
Oh.
And thank you too for listening. As always, do share your responses with us and subscribe to our channels on YouTube and Telegram. Till the next time, this is Chris and Junyan. We'll see you.